This is the role of, that's where humility comes into it again, is what can I, here we have a difficult situation. What can I do myself? Not pray that God heal this person so they don't annoy me so much, but what can we do that can make us be our best selves first?
Welcome to Wholiness Connection. Today I am thrilled to be speaking with Ian Punnett. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. Disinherited by his wealthy grandmother who disliked his long hair, Ian Punnett worked his way through undergrad in commercial radio, television, and print. Although most successful in hard rock radio through the 90s, Punnett switched to talk radio first at WGN Chicago and later legendary talker WGST in Atlanta. While in Georgia, he also worked for CNN while finishing his Master's of Divinity degree at Columbia Theological Seminary and being ordained. This multi-platform pattern, radio, TV, print, digital content creation, pro bono church work, would be repeated even after he was awarded his PhD in journalism and mass communication from Arizona State University. Now he manages being a professor at the A.Q. Miller School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Kansas State University, a radio performer, TV producer, print writer and editor, and digital presence, along with being the faculty advisor of the longest continually operating college FM music station in the country, KSDB-FM Wildcat 91.9, which was recognized in 2023 as the best college radio station in the nation by Intercollegiate Broadcasting System. As both a manager and performer, Punnett continues to win awards for his experimental and commercial audio and video. His books include editing media-related books and writing fiction, true crime, and books in the field of spirituality, including How to Pray When You're Pissed at God for Random House and the recent How Millennials Can Get Us Out of the Mess We're In, co-authored with authors from the Jewish and Muslim faith traditions, which will be a main focus of our conversation today. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting. You make it. I'd forgotten I said that thing about my grandmother, so it's funny, and although true, and but it's such a pleasure to be here. I love all of these types of conversations, so I look forward to hearing where you take it.
Great. Well, I'm just going to start sort of at the beginning for you in many ways, perhaps. We'll see where this goes. But I'm curious about a little more about your background and path, maybe then in terms of how that eventually led to this book. Because it's really interesting how it's co-authored, I think, it's got the three different faith traditions. And so I'm so curious about how all that came about.
Well, so the Muslim scholar who was the co-author is the father of a woman I got my PhD with, and we're buds. And so her father, actually, having read something I wrote, said, "Hey, I've had this idea for a while," and I said, "Well, sure," but I said, "If we're going to talk about Moses, we have to bring somebody else in." And I called an old book agent of mine, and I asked him about that. So it worked out really well to bring in a Reform rabbi from Miami, and he was super fun. And so it's funny because those two guys had so much in common, and so the Muslim scholar had been born in what became Pakistan. It was not even Pakistan at the time. And the Reform rabbi had been born in Israel, but they both emigrated here. So they were wonderful to work with together.
Yeah. Do you think you could have envisioned that, of course, not that particular project, but ahead of time? I think I can't remember exactly where. Somewhere I remember seeing or hearing that you had a connection somewhat to Judaism early on, maybe through friends or something like that. Yeah.
Well, so my godmother was Jewish. I'm showing you my desk work. My godmother was Jewish, and so I was raised with her kids as sort of my auxiliary brothers, and then she was wonderful. And then I had a rabbi across the street. And so this rabbi uh, used to bring me things like the abridged version of the Talmud. And so starting when I was an early teenager, I was reading things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So that was familiar with to you in some sense, like some
Oh, totally.
exploration. Yeah.
No, and I loved it. And it was
Hmm.
my favorite part of seminary was learning
Mm.
how to do the was really learning how to understand Hebrew and seeing Hebrew as it's kind of something that I understand why some people like to decode it, or whether they think,
Yeah.
but it's really just it's a very simple language, and it doesn't require any decoding. It requires us giving it context when we translate it into English,
Hmm.
and that's what I think. Finally, understanding the English version of things through a study of Hebrew was very helpful.
So just getting into the book a little more. So it's very much
Yes,
about the shared Moses story between the three
sure,
traditions, with a particular focus on it as a model for leadership today.
right.
So let's just start like from the fundamentals here. Like, how do you, I have in my notes, how do you define leadership? But I don't really mean this like Merriam Webster. We're not pinning it down that hard. But like, what are your thoughts on what leadership is? And maybe even some examples that are less obvious of what leadership could be and
Well,
is.
I think this is the so I teach leadership in one sense in that I teach student leaders. And the first thing that we learn, honestly, from the Moses story is early on, he was willing to share leadership. And he was
Mhm.
willing to share it with both his brother and then to a degree with Miriam, his sister, and that he he gave every opportunity, and this is a very interesting way of understanding it too. In a Muslim context, he gave every opportunity to Pharaoh to make a change and to offer a vision of what change would look like. That leadership isn't just for his people, it was for all people. And that's part of, I think, what still touches me about the Moses story today. And then the next thing, as any good leader should do, he learned that true leaders eat last,
Mm.
right? And up until that point in the Moses narrative, he's kind of a selfish guy. But God saw something in Moses. There was something about him in the way he cared for people and for originally animals,
Yeah.
that he began this sort of evolution toward putting other people first and realizing other people's pain was more important
Mm-hmm.
than his own life and trying to risk helping them. So he did that. And then another thing that true leaders do is they immediately start to look for their replacement.
Yeah.
That true leaders don't make it about them. And so even after they've established themselves at the top of the group, they still are reaching down and trying to bring others up with them so that when they pass, and we all pass, we
Mhm.
all lose leadership someday. It's a natural evolution. That when that happens, there will be people behind us who we have trained, and people who are stronger, and people who will offer perhaps gifts that we didn't have, and
Mhm.
and our legacy will live on through that. How's that?
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like it could apply in so many areas. There's a particular focus again in the book on the workplace, which is interesting to see that connection, partly
Mhm.
because of the, you know,
Right. Well,
antiquity
that's how
versus
we experience
modernity
leadership.
thing there.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was, yeah, there's some very interesting stories from people about difficult, what I would refer to as like the office pharaohs, right?
Hmm.
Who have that power and think they're always going to have it and
Hmm.
love to wield it,
Hmm.
thinking that this is somehow their birthright, that they get to treat other people badly so that they can work out their own issues of superiority. And so I like that part of the book too, quite a bit.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, because sometimes I think people don't almost recognize certain leadership roles that they're in. I mean, it seems
Right.
like it can apply in so many contexts,
Right.
even in family or maybe even in a friend group if someone just happens to maybe play that role a little more. So
Right.
recognizing that can be important, I think, in order to then take
And
on that mantle. Hmm.
emotional vampires, this idea of a psychic vampire, where there are people that kind of suck the energy out of a place.
Hmm.
And that's because every time they do, they feel better about themselves. The more they can lower everybody else, the better they feel about themselves. I think that's
Hmm.
sad, but I think there's truth to how that parallels in a very minor way the
Hmm.
Moses narrative. But again, I think that means we're called to
Yeah.
do better, and Moses gives us an example of how to do better.
Hmm. Yeah. So I was as particularly drawn to humility in leadership, which, there's
Mhm.
aspects in humility about with what we've already been talking about.
Right.
But it's interesting. I feel like it's an interesting challenge. So I'd be curious to hear more about, for people who haven't read the book yet, Moses and humility and how that played out. But also, it seems like there is this delicate balance in taking on a mantle of leadership, and then the humility part as well.
Right. So it's kind of like what you're doing right now.
Hmm.
You have to have enough of an ego to think, I'm going to host a show
Hmm.
and I'll be on camera and I'm going to talk to people I want to talk to and I'm going to interview people. You have to have enough of an ego to do that,
Hmm.
but not too much. That's the balance of humility where you start to think, oh, I am so good at this. Nobody is better than I am. Everybody has to talk about me in terms of superlatives, or I hate myself, or I'll make
Hmm.
them hate themselves for not doing. So this is typical of media. This is typical of politicians, and it's typical of small-minded leadership in
Hmm.
offices that see leadership as an opportunity to fill a hole in their soul,
Hmm.
and that's always kind of sad to me.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, this is what people do, and I think that's I think this is the role of prayer.
Mm.
This is the role of that's where humility comes into it again. Is what can here we have a difficult situation. What can I do myself? Not
Hmm.
pray that God heal this person so they don't annoy me so much, but what can we do that can make us be our best selves first,
Hmm.
and then we look to correct it.
Yeah. So it sounds like taking that time to really reflect and,
Yeah,
prayerful reflection in this particular example
right.
is essential to have that balance, I guess, right? Between the humility and
Exactly.
the having enough ego to attempt it.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
some of it's just like, uh it's our willingness to be ourselves.
Hmm.
And I often, I would when I have the opportunity to give a sermon or to participate in a service or to even to write a book like this, I kind of never miss the chance to make a joke, even sometimes if it's not the joke people expect me to make,
Hmm.
because we are called to make a joyful noise,
Hmm.
and I don't know of any noise more joyful than laughter. And
Yeah.
I'm willing to risk somebody going, well, but if I
Hmm.
find it funny, I have to be humble enough to go, well, I found that funny, and not
Yeah.
have to be, not pretend, not put on a pretense, not to have a separate version of myself for the public. I try to be, and I think we should all endeavor to be who we are in public is who we are in private.
Yeah. I think authenticity and transparency are really, really key. That's
Yeah,
definitely one of my principles. I sort of always struggle to find the word that fits both of them because
right.
nakedness isn't quite the right word to use, but it's like is kind of because it for me comes from the Gospel of Thomas saying that I really love,
Yeah,
where it's the shedding the clothing, like being like the little children when when they come to take the field,
yeah,
just like dropping it, like
one of my professors actually did the translation, one of the translations of the Gospel of Thomas, and so I was exposed to it early. And boy, there's some beautiful things in there. Just
It
really
really
interesting.
is. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because for people who aren't familiar with it, you can really see the correlations with the, other gospels too. Like in a lot of ways, there's it's done in more of a different style than anything, I'd say, is like the difference, but
Yeah,
there's
it
some
doesn't
parts
make
that are a
the
little
cut.
different.
Yeah, it doesn't make the cut
Hmm.
because there's no narrative to it.
Hmm. Yeah.
So had there
Sayings,
been a
basically.
narrative to it, we would probably be in the canon today. But
Yeah.
at the time, it was considered kind of Gnostic in many
Hmm.
respects, especially in the duality piece. That's,
Hmm.
I think, what freaked some people out
Right.
about it. There's a
Yeah.
lot of talk about
Hmm.
um, our inner and outer selves, and
Yeah.
I go back to that part of Thomas that I love so much, which is bring forth that which is inside you, and it will save you.
Mm.
Don't bring forth
Yeah.
that which is inside you, and it will kill you. It will
Yeah.
destroy you.
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time. In every context, I think about that kind of, I liken it sometimes when we talk about, it's kind of actually the same thing about media,
Hmm.
is it's as crass as it might seem, it's kind of like meatloaf, where
Hmm.
like if you make meatloaf, you cut it lengthwise, you can cut it like bread slice wise, it's all going to be the same. You can't cut if you cut this part and over here it's lasagna, it doesn't make any sense. Or if you cut it over here and
Hmm.
it's so meatloaf has to be that's and I so I think even though I don't eat meat, I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, is that kind of consistency that
Hmm.
people can count on
Yeah.
when they're looking for who your true self is.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this is bringing me to, I kind of right back to the like bringing it forth and stepping forward for leadership. I think that, like, at least for me, and I kind of think this is true for everyone probably, but we'll see. Um, a lot of life's journey, the spiritual journey, life's journey in general, like, is being humbled, like, all the time, like with our own humanity and in all
Right.
these different ways, right? Um, and then it's kind of like, when do you know that you're ready for leadership? There was a little bit of that element in the book, that it was kind of almost like a ripening of like when Moses was right in his journey.
Right.
And I mean, this is a
Well,
big question. I'm not expecting you to know
no, no,
perfectly,
no.
and everybody can go off and do their vocation, but but
Well, that's an interesting thing. It's
yeah.
like, all right, um, so he resisted it at first.
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
didn't jump up and go, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, pick me, pick me."
Hmm.
And I think anybody with a sense of humility would know just what you're taking on when
Hmm.
you take on a leadership role, especially for people who are in a position where it required sort of divine guidance to get through
Yeah.
it. And the reassurance that you will not be alone
Hmm.
uh, is a way different than the response that, and I think I framed it at the beginning of the book, when at the time candidate Trump was like saying, "I alone can fix this. I don't
Hmm.
need anybody else's help. I can do this. I alone. I'm the only
Hmm.
person that can fix that." That's kind of the opposite of the Mosaic approach,
Hmm.
which is I alone cannot fix this,
Hmm.
and I need help, and I'm going to inspire others to help me so that I can help more people. Because if I'm left up to my own devices, I don't think I have the energy or the smarts,
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah. It almost feels like a semi paradox, in the sense that it's like, it's when you understand you can't do it, in a sense,
Right.
not really that you can't, but your limitations, that maybe is the right time, and that you're getting it, and that's the time.
A
Hmm.
pastor friend of mine once said that it's like a jet stream. When you can just fall back into the jet stream and it will carry you, you're doing the right thing.
Hmm.
If you're facing headwind the whole time,
Hmm.
maybe you need to reconsider. Maybe not, but
Hmm.
maybe it's time to reconsider.
Well, it's interesting though. Let's explore that just a little more, because I think it's an interesting.
Sure.
It's an interesting thing to think about because sometimes we do face obstacles. Did you call it head stream? Was that what you said?
Jet stream,
Jet stream. That makes sense.
like
Yeah.
it's coming
Okay.
through at
Yeah.
such a point where it's literally carrying you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where, some people talk about it, I have wind in my sails, or I have,
Mm-hmm.
or there's just, you are getting further than you could have gotten on your own
Mm-hmm.
capacity.
It's hard to put it in words because I feel like I have experienced that ever before, but it's very hard to put into words. Where it's like I would call it, just because I come from more the mystical tradition, like a knowing with a capital K, that kind of thing.
Sure.
It's like you still just sort of know it's right and it's still
Right.
going. And then like the obstacles don't bother you in the same way. I guess
Mm.
I don't know. It's hard to explain it,
No, I
but
think that's a really good point. And I think so. Even just going with the mystical tradition, there is and I don't know how mystical you want to get here, but there
mm-hmm.
is a kind of um, there's a kind of magic quality about it, where you feel almost like it's an out of body experience, that
Mm-hmm.
you can just tell something has changed. This happened a lot. It's a similar story to what a lot of people go through. I know I went through it in discernment, right? When I was
Mm-hmm.
looking at going into the seminary, is I I just couldn't stop thinking about it, and I honestly couldn't stop frequently crying about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an obstacle,
Yeah.
look at it that way. But I also knew the more I gave into it, the more, if we're going to use the Muslim context, the more I submitted to
Mm-hmm.
it, the better I felt, until
Mm-hmm.
I finally just gave in completely. And that's when the jet stream really started carrying me past, and things that looked like obstacles. Like I still had to find my transcript, and I had to go through the application process, and things that were like, they ask questions and you think, oh, I'm just going to be honest and hope we get through this. All right. This could be a deal breaker, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then everything would work out beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah. I had written down the word surrender too. Like, how much is surrender? That's sort of another
Use
little
that word. Yeah.
balance thing. Like, is it, you
Right.
choose to take on the mantle, but it's also surrender.
It is
Mm-hmm.
exactly surrender. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you want to look at that and just call surrendering to the jet stream in that sense. And, we have this thing in our family, which is, we listen very carefully to what the still small voice is telling us,
Mm-hmm.
the voice
Yeah.
in the whirlwind. And sometimes it leads you to do goofy things, that like things like, well, that don't make any sense. But we really feel strongly that we support each other if
Mm.
that still small voice is the impetus for that.